Okay, so Natalie, thank you so much for joining us for this installment of the ASA Oral History Project. It's really exciting to be here and talk to you in your beautiful office, a bit about, your journey in Asian studies, how it started and how it's going and where you want to go next. But
Thank
perhaps you
you.
could just start by introducing yourself a little bit. Who are you and when, where, and how did your path to Asian studies begin?
Sure. Thank you, Tash. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this really excellent project. I'm really honoured and so respect the work of ASAA, so I'm really happy to it. So I'm Natali Pearson and I am a senior lecturer and a DECRA fellow. So I have a DECRA research project, DECRA fellowship, here at the University of Sydney. I work in museum and heritage studies. And my work is on maritime heritage in Southeast Asia. We'll get to that eventually, I suppose, as to what I'm sort of researching. But my origin story, it goes back a very long time, makes me realize I've been around for a while. I was really fortunate when I was in high school, actually, to join a modern history tour to Vietnam in 1994. And I wasn't even studying modern history, I was doing ancient history, but I got wind of this modern history tour to Vietnam and somehow convinced my teachers to let me go as well. And I had previously done an exchange to France, which was fine, but I got off the plane in Vietnam and I just thought, oh my gosh, this is so different. And I don't know anything. Like, I don't even really know where I am. Um, Nothing is familiar here. And it was the beginning of just my interest in Southeast Asia from that moment. So that was in year 10. And when I finished school in 1996, I took a gap year, and a lot of my friends went to the UK, and I could not understand why they wanted to go to the UK and spend a year in, the grey London skies. So I just worked in a delicatessen for a couple of months and made sandwiches and made money. And then I saw an ad in the paper to go to Salatiga on the PIBI program, the language and culture program in Central Java. It cost $2,000 and I had $2,000. And it was close enough to Vietnam that I thought this will still be interesting. And that was it. So I went to the PIBI program. Got to Salatiga. I climbed mountains. I learned how to count to 10. And that was my gap year. And when I came back from Salatiga, I changed my enrolment. I was meant to be doing media and communications, but I changed it to arts Asian studies at UNSW Sydney so that I could continue on doing Indonesian. I did the Achichis program in the year 2000 and yeah, never looked back really. And when I was at UNSW Sydney, I started studying Indonesian formally in 1998. And that was the most amazing year to start learning about Indonesia. And all my teachers, my lecturers, my tutors were just completely overwhelmed by what was going on in Indonesia. Ed Aspinall was my tutor, and he was always running around looking really stressed. And now I completely understand why, because we were seeing this massive turmoil and upheaval in a country that had been ostensibly stable under the Orde Baru for 30 odd years. And yeah, so I started learning about Indonesia that year, 1998. The following year, Timor-Leste had the opportunity to vote in the popular consultation, and they voted to separate from Indonesia. I did a Chichis in 2000, and then in 2001, 2002, I did my honours thesis
Okay.
in Timor-Leste, which was by then independent. And yeah, I went to Timor and looked at, well, you can probably tell what I looked at because all my ties are behind me. I looked at the use of TICE to perform national identity on the global stage. I just noticed that all the visitors to Timor-Leste were being, adorned with these beautiful woven scarves in particular. So I went to Timor and wrote my honours thesis about that back in the day where you didn't have to do an ethics approval process. I just told my supervisors, David Reeve and Jean Gelman-Taylor, I said, I'll let you know when I'm back. Off I went. Off I went. So that was
Wow.
2002. And I finished my honours thesis and immediately I was offered a job by the Department of Defence in Canberra because, of course, Australia was leading Interfet at that time, the peacekeeping force, we'd just sort of been leading Indefet, and I think Defence wanted to hire anybody who even knew where Timor-Leste was,
Yeah.
even if they'd been looking at TICE. So, so I got my first job in Canberra in the federal government and ended up on the Indonesia East Timor policy desk in International Policy Division. So it
Wow.
all came together, and to be honest, I never planned a career or anything. I just did what appealed, what interested me, and I suppose what I was good at. Although if you speak to David Reeve and Ed Aspinall, they'll probably tell you I was not a very diligent student. Um, but I just kept pursuing what interested me, and that has always been Southeast Asia.
That is so brilliant. What a varied journey.
Yes.
So, I mean, it was so fascinating to hear you talk about a degree in Asian studies and an honors thesis where you went overseas for it. And I want to hear a bit more about your initial forays into research in this field. So, whether your honors thesis or maybe even your PhD, whichever you prefer to talk about, how did you
Mm.
go about that initial experience in your research, and what skills and knowledge did you need to complete it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always been interested in doing research. I think my honours year was one of the most enjoyable of my life, having that freedom to pursue something that I was, really interested in. And I really regret not publishing my honours thesis. At the time, it was quite a novel approach, but many people have published on it since then on TICE and on material culture in Timor-Leste. Um, I went off and did a few more degrees in the interim before I committed to the PhD. I did a master's degree when I was at Defence because they paid for it, so why wouldn't you? And then I did another master's degree in museum and heritage studies. And actually, one of my lecturers said to me, "Wow, two masters, it's time you did the big one." And I took it really seriously. And then I was like, I have to go and do a PhD now. Um, and and I thought, I don't know what my research question is. I'm not committing to a PhD until I have something that can sustain me over 3 years. After Defence, I had worked at AUSTRAC for a little while, which is the Australian Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing Regulator. And they've been doing a lot of work on like typologies of money laundering in real estate, luxury vehicles, boats, that kind of thing, casinos. But there wasn't a lot of work being done back then anyway on money laundering in antiquities. And, all this stuff was happening in the Middle East with sites in Iraq and Syria being just looted and the antiquities ending up in the auction houses of London. And I was in search of this PhD project, and suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, I want to look at that in a Southeast Asian context, bring that anti-money laundering stuff about how antiquities are used to move value across borders illicitly. How is that working out in Southeast Asia? Southeast Asia is a place where many objects have been taken from and are now in, those museums in Europe. So I started off looking at the Borobudur Buddha heads, because a lot of them, even when I went on that PIBI program in 1997, I had visited Borobudur and noticed how many of the Buddhas were missing their heads. And they are in museums in London and Russia and Jakarta as well, of course. Anyway, I started that, and then one of my supervisors, Adrian Vickers, famously said to me, "Oh, Natalie, there's a shipwreck in Singapore. Maybe you want to do a comparative thing with Borobudur on land and this shipwreck from the ocean." I was like, okay. So I went off to Singapore and looked at the shipwreck, and it was so engaging, the ethics and the politics around how this 9th century shipwreck found in Indonesia in the late 1990s had ended up in a museum in Singapore. I didn't have the guts to tell Adrian that I was changing my topic. I sent him a postcard.
What?
And and I got home before the postcard arrived. So when I saw him again, I assumed he knew that I ditched Borobudur. I didn't have anything to contribute to Borobudur. So many people have worked on it. I mean, I can see why it's so magnificent. But the shipwreck, really, there was so much that could be asked of that shipwreck and how it ended up where it did. So Adrian, to his credit, went on, continued for the ride. So I suppose a willingness to be flexible would be something that I brought to my PhD. I I particularly valued my Indonesian language skills, which are not the best in the world, but they're something. Like I can make my way through a presidential decision, right, and a ministerial regulation. And like one example of that I encountered during my PhD with the difference between warisan, pusaka, like heirlooms, antiquities, these sort of things that have spiritual value almost, cagar budaya, which is like cultural heritage, and then the way underwater objects are conceived of in the legislation, which is, what is it? Benda berharga asal muatan kapal yang tenggelam, which means valuable objects derived from shipwrecks that have sunk.
Yeah.
So even immediately looking at the legislation with my language knowledge, I could see that there were all these different ways of framing cultural heritage from the ocean in terms of whether it was spiritual, ancestral, or like a resource to be commodified. So trawling through all that legislation, I was so grateful for my Indonesian language skills and for what I'd learned at uni and through Achichis.
Yeah.
And then with the PhD, I don't know, actually, look, the other thing that really sustained me through the PhD was here at the University of Sydney, we had the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre, which is still in existence today. At that time, it was led by Michelle Ford, with two amazing deputy directors, Liz Kramer and Tashara Dibley. And, you know, those three women in particular, plus all the other people who've contributed to SEAC over the years, created a community that was very sustaining for postgraduates. And I met some other scholars through SEAC who were also doing their PhDs at the same time, archaeologists, theatre and performance studies, historians, and together we sort of built this community of early career researchers, postgraduate students who are really interested in Southeast Asia, and having that community around me, I think, got me across the line.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's such a wonderful institute, and we'll definitely talk more about it and your involvement with it as well.
Yeah.
But I just want to capture this along the way, which is that you seem to be suggesting that in your career you've moved between academic ventures and non-academic ventures in government. And I'm just really interested in like what is your whole trajectory, and when have you been studying and when have you been working, and how has that happened for you?
Yeah, look, I only did my honours degree because someone asked me if I'd like to do it. Like, I never understood what an honours degree might position you for. So now when I have undergraduates or, you know, new students coming to me, we sort of always do talk about what is the difference between an honours and a master's degree, and why might an honours degree be something that you want to do and want to try and get as high marks as you can, because then it enables acceptance into a PhD program, right? But when I finished my honours, my supervisor, Jean Gelman-Taylor, a beautiful historian, she very gently said to me, Natalie, don't go straight into a PhD, go and get some life experience first. And like I said, I was hired by the Department of Defence, and very grateful for that experience. First of all, it was my first regular income, which was a complete novelty, but also it really challenged my, I don't know, political leanings and assumptions about what defence looks like and what the ADF is like and what people who serve are like. And, you know, we're leaping ahead here, but I'm currently working on a project on warships and sunken World War II shipwrecks, you know, shipwrecks from the Second World War in Southeast Asia. And I'm just very grateful for that experience working at Defence to understand the scale of it, how it's so unmanageable, you know, but also they've got so many resources and so much incredible technology and so many wonderful people. At the same time, it doesn't, you know, quite align with my politics to be part of this, you know, industrial war machine, I suppose. So having a perspective that lets me see not both sides, but like all sides of that discussion is really something I'm grateful for. Yeah. And I suppose having a bit of time away from study, I think helped make me a better scholar, because I've just got more experience now, and I would hope that I'm better able to communicate than I was, you know, if I'd gone straight into my PhD straight out of honours.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. And so from Department of Defence, you went to the anti-money laundering, and then from there you went into the PhD, or?
No, I did that second master's along the way. In fact, I did that second master's when I was living in Hong Kong with my husband. And I took some time off to have our daughter in Hong Kong, and then enrolled in this second master's degree. And that was actually a fabulous opportunity to learn a bit more about East Asia, which I still am so Southeast Asia focused. Like, don't talk to me about Korea or Japan or Hong Kong or anything. So living in Hong Kong forced me to come to grips with that a bit more. And as part of this Masters of Museum and Heritage Studies that I did, it was run by the University of Sydney in Hong Kong at the time, and you had to do an internship. And if I'd been in Sydney, I probably would have gone to the National Maritime Museum or the Art Gallery of New South Wales or, something great like that. But I was in Hong Kong, so I'd been volunteering at Asia Society in Hong Kong. I was a volunteer in their new gallery, and I used to show people around the galleries the beautiful exhibitions of the objects that had come from the Rockefeller collection in New York. So for my internship, I said to them, look, can I York, and I got it. So I did, I don't know how long I was there for, maybe 2 months at the Asia Society Museum in New York.
Wow.
That was amazing. And the director was an Australian, Melissa Chu, who was like this. I mean, she just shook up the art world. She was incredible. And I worked on an exhibition on Iran, which modern Iranian art. And it was a difficult exhibition for them to work with because there are sanctions with Iran, and these questions around getting objects across borders again came into it.
Yeah.
And also Asia Society, that experience reminded me very much that, well, first of all, the collection came from a wealthy collector, and there's lots of questions around collecting these days, collecting of objects. But also Asia Society conceives of Asia very broadly. So for them to be looking at Iran as part of their scope was something different for me. Yeah. So I'm back firmly in my Southeast Asia bubble now, but it was a wonderful experience to spend time in Hong Kong and then in New York working on that Iran Modern exhibition, and just to broaden my networks and thinking a little, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah. That is so wonderful. And yeah, it actually makes me curious, like if you were to describe your expertise today, how do you do that?
Oh, I don't know. Actually, I experimented with Copilot the other day to see what Copilot thought of me, but it was not a very satisfactory answer. So I'll just give you the human answer. I'm a scholar of maritime heritage in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
So when people ask me what that means, I just say I look at shipwrecks in Indonesia. It's a little bit broader than that now. Maritime heritage, I suppose, people assume it's shipwrecks. It's also submerged aircraft, but it's also submerged cultural landscapes, of which we have many in Australia, in an Australian context. But most of my work is on shipwrecks. Yeah. I've been talking about them with my colleague as charismatic megafauna of the ocean. So we talk about like the whales and the dolphins, but the shipwrecks are the charismatic mega whatever word of maritime heritage, because it's very easy to immediately engage people with a shipwreck. And sometimes I feel a bit embarrassed at how excited people get over shipwrecks, and I'm very interested in theorizing shipwrecks. But people always want to know, what's the best wreck I've ever dived? And I don't, I'm like, oh, but what about the theory? What about multidisciplinary approaches? And so, that's classic academic, right? So look, I have a big commitment to service. I'm a lifetime member of the Australasian Institute for Maritime Archaeology. I'm a counsellor for them. I'm really committed to sort of building that organisation. They're really interested in working more in the Asia Pacific, and they do really good work in that space, really respectful engagement. So, I'm part of AMA, and I'm also president of Indonesia Council, which is a sub-regional association of Asian Studies Association of Australia. Such a mouthful. So I think I actually watched Liz Kramer's interview, and she described ASAA and Indonesia Council as parent and child, and I'm happy with that explanation. Okay. So that's fine. I think it's a good one. There's lots of these sub-regional associations. So Indonesia Council has been around since 2000, I think, and I've been president since 2022, but only officially since 2024, because actually under my leadership, we've introduced a constitution. So it's like a formal appointment now. We have to vote, and there's AGMs, and we've also introduced paid membership. So we've got special incentives for students, undergraduate students and high school students are free. And we're always trying to think about what we can do to, I suppose, increase that pipeline of particularly Australian students and scholars who are culturally literate enough to engage with Indonesia.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, so much of my work in that space involves sending out letters to vice chancellors saying, please don't close this language program, please don't close this international studies program.
Yeah.
You know, we try and do as much as we can. We're a small volunteer organisation, but it is a very rewarding space to work in, and I get to work with people like Liz and other members of the exec. So yeah, I've got my finger in lots of different pies, I suppose, but connecting all of them is either something maritime or something Southeast Asia.
Yeah, wonderful. And yeah, you are involved in so much. I'm excited to talk to you more about, yeah, your involvement in the life of all these Asian studies ventures. But before we get there, I just wondered if you'd want to tell us a little bit about a particular book or article or project, anything that you've worked on that best reflects the work you do that you want people to know about.
Oh, should have my book.
Oh
That's behind me.
yeah,
I don't know if you can see it. Can you
yeah.
see it? I didn't put it there on purpose. I just had a meeting with a student and we were talking about different genres of writing. So
Okay.
actually piled up underneath it is my honours thesis, which no one is ever allowed to read. Oh my gosh, it's so embarrassing. And my master's dissertation
Wow.
and then my book. So yeah, I will nominate my book as my defining output. It is a rewrite of my PhD, but actually the way it came about, oh my gosh. So I submitted, I think my PhD was conferred in 2019. And I had started working for the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre by that point with Michelle Ford. And anyway, one of my key roles was to take undergraduate students to Southeast Asia through the new Colombo Plan.
Yes.
And what a privilege that was. I just love that. But then COVID hit, right? So all the field schools were put on pause for quite a while. We did do one online in 2021, I think. But, you know, we weren't doing mobility for a couple of years and that was my bread and butter. I was the curriculum coordinator, so I had to find something else to do. I didn't really know what I was going to do. And then Michelle says to Liz Kramer and I, oh, let's start a book club. And I was like, great, I love reading books. And Michelle was like, no, we're going to write them.
Oh,
like, oh no, I just
wow.
want to read them.
Yeah.
So Liz and I, under, you know, Michelle's sort of guidance and imposition of deadlines in particular, wrote our books together and turned our PhDs into books. I read all of Liz's draft, so I know more about Indonesian political patronage networks than I ever wanted to, and money politics. And she knows more about shipwrecks than she ever wanted to. But we read each other's draft, and unbelievably, we submitted our manuscripts, me to the University of Hawaii Press and her to Cornell University Press, within 24 hours of each other. It was amazing.
Wow.
So yeah, look, I excised a whole chapter on Indonesian legislation from the book. I realized that I had my PhD now, like I had this scholarly, I don't know, I'd been accepted into the academy. I didn't have to write in such a defensive tone. I could afford to be a bit more authoritarian, or authoritative, not authoritarian. Oh my God. I hope my book's not authoritarian.
That's so good.
Authoritative. And also I've written it more, it's more narrative driven, to be honest, and a bit more lively than the PhD, which is just for your examiners, right? So I got rid of the chapter on Indonesian legislation and published that in a scholarly journal because it was worth publishing, but no one wants to read it in a book. So it's pretty much my PhD, but just rewritten in a more engaging way. And, you know, it's a project that I had done all the research for the PhD. So I think I really regret to say this, but I think that will be the easiest book project I ever do, because future books, I won't have the benefit of 4 years of PhD research before I then rewrite it into something beautiful and engaging. I just have to hit the ground running with my next book project. So, yeah.
So true, and a good lesson for me to learn currently doing my PhD too.
We can talk about a book club when you're done.
Yeah. Oh, dear.
I know you're not going to accept my calls anymore after I said that.
Exactly. Oh, it's too good. So yeah, coming to then Asian studies, I wonder, like, how does Asian studies feature into the current role you have? So I've heard a bit about Indonesia Council, AMA, Sydney Southeast Asia Centre. Like, what are you doing now, and how does Asian studies feature?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I got a DECRA fellowship, which is a 3-year research fellowship funded by the Australian Research Council. Thank you, Australian Research Council,
Amazing.
for funding my work on World War II shipwrecks. What that means is I have a reduced teaching load. So I'm mostly research, but when I do teach, I try to embed mainstream Southeast Asia and maritime into all of my lectures and tutorials and readings. So I coordinated a core unit for the Museum and Heritage Studies program this year, and there wasn't a huge amount of scope for innovation with the reading list that had all sort of been finalised already, but I did manage to dedicate one of the lectures, one of the weeks, to looking at museums and heritage in our region, and we've got a really great guest lecturer come and speak about her new book on museums in Asia. And I think, it's really important the students have a solid understanding of what museums and heritage looks like here in Australia, particularly in Indigenous contexts. And it's also important, I think, for them to be able to contextualize it within our region. So I'm always, and I'm upfront with the students about that. I say, look, I'm going to try and sneak Southeast Asia or a shipwreck or both into everything I tell you. And it's not done in what's the right word here? It's always relevant, right? It's not shoehorning it in. Southeast Asia, with its diversity, has so many incredible examples I can draw on for my museum and heritage studies teaching. For my research, it's all Southeast Asia. My DECRA project, I'm looking at shipwrecks in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Timor-Leste, and doing field work in all of those countries. And doing a lot of, I suppose, outreach and engagement in the region as well, with conferences, and I did a talk for ITB in Bandung a couple of weeks ago, but so it's not just about working with research assistants in the region or collecting data, but I'm also very committed to understanding what my colleagues and collaborators, what value they see in my project, and it differs from country to country. So that's I suppose an early finding from the project in terms of what maritime heritage means to different countries and different institutions in the region. Yeah. I suppose the other thing I do that I haven't touched on is co-hosting the New Books in Southeast Asia podcast, which is syndicated on the New Books Network. And that's a great excuse to get free copies of books I want to read. No, seriously, there's so many good books on Southeast Asia coming out, and I'm going to read them anyway. And now I've got an excuse to read them and to interview the authors. And that's really great. Give someone a platform to talk about a work of which they should be proud.
Exactly.
And it's also nice for me. I think it's good for me because it forces me to read outside my discipline, which I do very much anyway. But I think, asking people questions from a different disciplinary perspective than my own helps me understand my own research better as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've done interviews on the multi-species city in Singapore. I did an amazing one on World War II in Bangka Island in Indonesia, which is just next to Belitung Island, where the shipwreck I looked at for my PhD is from. But yeah, I've got a whole bunch. There's a pile of books up there. I don't know if you can see them. Whole bunch of amazing interviews coming up for that podcast, and it's just so great to be able to share all this new research on Southeast Asia with the world. There's so much good stuff coming out of there.
Exactly. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, we'll dig up a link to your podcast.
Okay.
Put it in the show notes, as they would say. And what involvement have you had then in the life of the ASAA?
Yeah, I had to look that up. When you reached out to me, I thought, why am I being invited to participate in this project? What have I ever done for the ASAA? So I looked it up. So I got a bursary to attend the 2016 conference in Canberra.
Yeah.
And that included accommodation, and that meant so much to me as a student. It probably wasn't a lot, maybe $2,000, but gosh, that is so invaluable as a postgraduate student to go. And who did I meet? Tom Popinski. And I was like, wow. And he's he's working on this book on Malaysian politics and identity now. And I first met him in 2016 in Canberra because of ASAA's generosity. And that was really important. And I've been to many ASAAs since then. It prompted me that generosity prompted me to put my hand up for the postgraduate representative position in 2016. And I continued in that for 2 years until I timed out of it because I submitted my PhD. I think I gave a speech in which I said, if I'm still here next year, please tell me to go home and finish my thesis. I vaguely remember doing that. I think I gave that speech here in Sydney in 2018. So in 2018, Sydney Southeast Asia Centre convened the ASAA, and it was huge. I had just started. I did not know what I was in for, and there were so many people. I don't know how many, like thousands. I think it was the biggest ASAA ever, and they themed the food around a different sort of. I think we had South Asian food, then Southeast Asian food, and East Asian food across the 3 days. So it was amazing. The food was great, and then I suppose I'm president of Indonesia Council now, right? A sub-regional body. So. I still have a lot to do with the ASAA. I just saw that the latest rounds of grants have come out. It's fantastic to see people who've got workshop grants and some of the exciting stuff that's going on. So I just think it's a really important organisation, and I'm so grateful to be, I guess, associated with it through Indonesia Council. Yeah, and to give a little bit back because I feel like, I have really benefited from ASAA over the years.
Absolutely. And that 2018 conference was also my first interaction with the ASAA as an undergraduate student volunteer, wearing bright orange shirts.
That's right.
That's my first memory of you. That is that conference. I think you must have been convening in some way. Or
I was in charge of the volunteers. You're right.
That's it.
I'd forgotten that. And you were like, it was like a little army, to be honest. Like you had subsections and there were people in charge of different sections. And what I also remember is that we tried to be really generous with the volunteers, and they were a huge part of the final sort of drinks after party, closing ceremony. And it was really lovely to see all these people who'd volunteered their time celebrating and being part of, well, you could see that they were realizing that they could be part of, this bigger community. Yeah.
Exactly. I had no idea what it was. I had no idea why I was there, but I just loved it. And exactly that idea of like, I could be a part of this one day is exactly what I got from it.
And look at you. That's amazing.
Funny how these things work.
That's right. Have you still got your orange t-shirt?
I should look for it somewhere. I actually don't know about that.
Oh man, I think they're collector's items now.
Exactly. Totally. So good.
Oh gosh. Well, I'm sorry I don't remember you from back then, Tash, but I think we had a lot of volunteers. Like there were about 70 or 80.
Yeah. It was huge.
Yeah,
It was wonderful.
Could not have done it without you.
I mean, it brings us to thinking a little bit more about like Asian studies as a field in general, I guess. And like, I'd be interested to know, like, what do you see as the strengths and the challenges of the field for Asian studies in Australia at the moment?
I have not written any notes for this one. Because I think if I started writing notes, it might get depressing. Look, we just had Indonesia Council Open Conference in Melbourne in July, so 2 months ago. And one of the key pieces of feedback was that so many of the people presenting and participating were from Indonesia.
Yeah.
And which is great. It's what we've been trying to get. But there's not a big pipeline of Australian students coming through. And that is really sad.
Yeah.
And it has really brought home, I think, for Indonesia Council Executive that the pipeline needs to start in schools. The higher education sector is in a great deal of distress at the moment with language programs and, international mobility and international studies programs closing. And I think investing in kids when they're in school is what we need to start rebuilding that pipeline. Look, the strengths, I suppose one example I would give with the strengths is that those scholars we do have who are working on Southeast Asia are incredible. And I'm thinking of the recent unrest reset Indonesia in the last couple of weeks, towards the end of August, early September 2025. And some of the scholarship that's come out quite quickly by people like Liz Kramer, Ed Aspinall, Tim Lindsay, and then Liz Kramer, Ken Setiawan, and Charlotte Setiardi wrote that amazing piece about cats in the context of the looting in politicians' houses. And like this scholarship came out so fast, it was so sharp. It looked back at reformasi and the demands back then and drew out the differences. And there's enough scope and strength within Australian Indonesian studies that we were also able to publish, Liz, Charlotte, and Ken, this incredible article about cats in the context of the looting, really fresh and different perspective. But I mean, they absolutely nailed it in terms of how it's been played out on social media, how it speaks to the excess of the politicians, how they've abandoned their homes, but they've managed to take their cars with them, but not their cats, So I think I was quite impressed with those contributions, and I know that those articles played a big role in helping people who are not so familiar with Indonesia understand what was going on. So look, I think the scholars we do have are great, but I am concerned about that pipeline. Yeah.
Absolutely. And do you see some kind of role for like trying to increase an emphasis on collaboration with scholars from the region? Like, where does working together come in?
Where does working together come in? I mean, it's absolutely central. So it does need to be all about collaboration, and it's all about deep networks and investment of time and energy, and this is not something that can be done quickly. The Moore report, the invested, the Nicholas Moore report, investing, what's the actual title of it? The Moore report, it's invested, I think it's Southeast Asia's economic future to 2040. Investment is a key part of that title. It's not just about financial investment, though. It's about investing over the long term and building those relationships, collaborative relationships of trust with people, and I've been reflecting on this because of the Achichi's anniversary coming up, the 30th anniversary, and thinking about, when you participate in something like a short-term mobility program, even the 2-week NCP ones as they used to be, but Achichi's for me was 6 months. It's going to have an impact, right, at the time. But I had not foreseen how long that impact would keep coming back to me, how many years into the future I would keep circling back to those contacts, those people, those networks, those learnings. So investing money is really important, and I've got lots of ideas for how we can invest money, starting in schools, but investing time as well and energy into developing, as it says in the Moore report, cultural literacy, so that you can engage respectfully and meaningfully.
Yes, exactly. And I've also been thinking about the role that these kind of bridging programs must play, like Achichis and New Colombo. And I mean, you've been so much involved in all of those. So what do you see as the strengths of those programs, and how would you want to see them develop to kind of evolve to address the current challenges that we have?
Well, it's a hard one, So I co-led about 12 of those NCP field schools, and to Southeast Asia, not just to Indonesia, but the defining thing about those field schools was they were multidisciplinary. They weren't just students, so I work in archaeology now. They weren't just students from archaeology going to learn about Indonesia, but students from social work, students from maths, students from political economy. And I suppose that reminds me all the time of how important different perspectives are. There's not just one way or two ways of doing things, there's many ways of doing things, and understanding the region. I know there have been changes to the NCP program to support, deeper immersion. So extending the duration of the programs, for example, and that's great. I'm all for more immersion, but I suppose it's difficult if the students want to learn more about that country, and they come back and nowhere's teaching the language.
Yes, exactly.
So Achichi's, NCP, even faculty supported field schools, speaking in the university setting, these are all really important. At the same time, they need to be part of a bigger ecosystem that resists monolingualism and resists the idea that this way is the only way of doing things, and is open to, I don't know, we just need the structures and policies in place so that students who do want to engage more with the region, the student mobility is part of that. But what Lydia Santoso said it so well in her recent op-ed for the AFR, Australian Financial Review, she said, we can't rely on luck and student enthusiasm to carry the Indonesia-Australia relationship.
Yeah.
That's the starting point. It's a really important part of it, but there needs to be something more for those enthusiastic and lucky students who do get the chance to go on one of those programs so that they can extend their engagement.
Yes, exactly. That is so true and so powerfully put. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, thinking, yeah, was there something else you
Well,
wanted?
that's Lydia's words, not mine. Yeah. Yeah.
Thinking, I guess, on the other side of it a little bit, like, what are the topics or the subfields that are like most exciting to you in the field at present?
Oh, feminism.
Oh, yes.
Look, I worked at SEAC for a long time, and I'm a big embracer of multidisciplinary approaches. So, look, I work in maritime archaeology, but my research assistants in Australia and Indonesia and Timor-Leste have expertise in human rights and justice, coastal livelihoods, marine biodiversity. So I'm always interested in what different disciplines have to say. So I'm a bit reluctant to pull out one field or subfield.
Yeah.
I think if you've got the right person working on it, any of these fields
Yeah.
can be super exciting.
That's so true.
And I am slowly seeding the idea that there can be feminist approaches to these disciplines or to these research questions, and that feminism doesn't have to be a scary word. It can just be another way of looking at the world, maybe a beneficial way of looking at the world. So I'm, I use that word carefully in my scholarship, but I do read a lot of the, literature coming out of gender and cultural studies, I suppose. But I'm also really interested in some of the work being done in disability and social inclusion.
Yes.
So I've got a small project going on in Timor on accessible heritage tourism at the moment, looking at, ableism, and that also feeds into maritime heritage, because diving is an activity that you do need a lot of privilege to be able to do. You need money, you need gear, you need someone at home to look after grandma or the kids or whatever. So thinking about all these questions around access and inclusion, I don't think that really answers your question, but I'm just flying the flag for multidisciplinary approaches, really. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, that's so brilliant. Look, well, you've been so generous with your time. I mean, I think I'll ask one more question. We could probably just leave it there.
Yeah.
The question is this. So what are a few things that us as Asianists, either collectively or individually, could be doing to better prepare ourselves for the future that's ahead?
Oh, us as Asianists. Well, I mean, we're the choir. So, right? So I don't know if we need to preach to the choir. I think we need to start bringing in people who are around us.
Yes.
So I suppose that's what I would suggest. I've got a lot of honours students and master's students at the moment. Very few of whom are interested in sort of Asia or Southeast Asia in particular, but that's totally fine. But I suppose just saying things like, well, this is how they do it in Thailand, and have you heard about this example from the museum in Jakarta, and they're having these debates in the context of, Vietnam. Just mainstreaming Southeast Asia, like I said earlier, so that it's not like another place, but it's just an integrated part of our understanding of, the world that we live in and the place that we occupy geographically in our region, of course, but, for the future too. So I suppose, yeah, not preaching to the choir, we're already converted,
Yeah.
but thinking about ways that we can reach new people and make it a bit easier to engage.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. No, that's so, so great. Well, thank you so much again for your time today. It's just been so wonderful to hear
Thank you.
a bit about your career and what you're thinking. I mean, did you have any final words? Otherwise, we'll just leave it there.
I don't think so. I just am
Yeah.
really grateful. It was really kind of fun to look back on all those different experiences, and thank you for letting me talk about myself for an hour
Of course.
within the context of Asia. And I just am really looking forward to seeing all the other interviews, and want to congratulate you and David and you on such a great project.
Thank you so much. Thanks,
Yeah,
Natalie. Okay, we'll leave
thank
it.
you.